Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast, The Making of Stories. I'm your host, Joad Mir. First of all, my sincere apologies. It's been a while since I've had regular episodes, which are supposed to be every other day. It hasn't happened the last 2 weeks. Just a lot of stuff has come up, just some personal stuff. Plus, I've been working on a film that I'll tell you about down the road, and just prepping up for that, location scouting and casting. And yeah, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in the works. The podcast is growing slowly. The audience is growing, and I'm trying to try different things, anything that's relevant to stories. So even if it's a film, whether it's a book, an author of any sort, or any fascinating story that I hear about, it may not have anything to do with the film, but potentially can lead to a film or a TV show or series down the road. I'll be trying to cover that and see how that plays out. Um, got a whole bunch of episodes that we've already shot. I spoke to Simon Wells again, who I've spoken to like 7, 8 times on this podcast. We just talked about storyboarding and a whole bunch of different stuff. JV Hart, who has written Bram Stoker's Dracula, he came on again to talk about Steven Spielberg's Hook, and a few other people, and there's some other coming up. Today, I'll be speaking to Stephen Rosenbaum again, who I have on this podcast. For this episode, he'll be talking about Jurassic Park, but I have him on for Avatar, James Cameron's Avatar, the first one, followed by a few other things. So, yeah, my conversation with Stephen Rosenbaum has spanned into like 4 different episodes: The Abyss, Terminator 2, Forrest Gump, and now Jurassic Park. You've seen those episodes, and thank you for watching them and listening to them. This was great conversation as well. A lot of the information that Jurassic Park has is already out there, but there's still some fun and anecdotal stories and tech stuff that you can, listen to and watch and enjoy. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Stephen Rosenbaum for Jurassic Park. To have you again to talk about Spielberg's Jurassic Park, what your role and your team's role exactly was. I'll let you, you know, take a start from Jurassic Park. We left off with um, T2.
Terminator 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
That it sort of really set the stage for Jurassic. I mean, we had on T2, we had the opportunity to do a individual character, and it was a humanoid-like character, very human-like, I guess. Um, but it was metallic. Now all of a sudden we had to do quadrupeds and various forms of bipeds that had real skin and moved and interacted with humans. So that was a whole different level for us. It was interesting the beginning, the very early days when Stephen was first talking about the project with us, um, specifically in computer graphics, we were being propositioned to just do add motion blur to go motion footage. So Phil Tippett, who everybody should know if they don't, look him up. He's a god in our industry, but he had his own studio at this point. He had moved away from ILM, and he was doing a lot of what we called go motion work, which was sort of an evolution of stop motion. So the go motion is you could, similar to stop motion, where you move a puppet, to a pose, you take a picture, you move the puppet to slightly to the next pose, you take a picture, and so forth. With go motion, you're actually doing the same, but you're slightly moving the puppet during the exposure, so it gives a sort of a pseudo motion blur effect to it. So we had done some tests where Phil had animated a raptor running using a go motion technique, and they actually developed a new device called I think it was called a digital input device or something like that, and it allowed him to animate much faster and more efficiently. But if you imagine, it was like a profile shot of a raptor running, right? Raptors run bipedally, and then uh, we would take that film element, scan it, and then add motion blur to the legs to make it even more smooth. See if that looked better than what Phil could output. Um, and it did. We looked It looked pretty good. And so Stephen, the initial thought was, okay, Phil's going to do all the foreground dinosaurs, and ILM computer graphics will do all the background dinosaurs. And um, we specifically Steve Williams was actually one of our main animators at the time. He had animated Robert Patrick in the T-1000 and Terminator and he actually even going back to the Abyss, the pseudopod, and he took it upon himself to build a T-Rex. Initially, it was just a skeleton, um, and he did a walk cycle of the T-Rex. Just we got a plate from Dennis Murin, who was the supervisor on the show, and he we comped it in. He rendered it out, and we comped it into the shot and sent it to Steven, just saying, "Hey, we can do animation, full, principal hero animation." And that kind of blew the doors off, honestly. He didn't expect that. And there was a essentially a title shift to, okay, let's do more of the principal creature work in computer graphics. Um, but the big question mark there was Phil. We had this incredible resource with Phil, and so the genius of the plan was that we actually brought Phil back into computer graphics, and this was a new medium for him, but animation is, he is the master of that craft, and so he basically took our animators and sent them to animation school. He trained them how he animates, and and he essentially directed all the animation that we did in computer graphics firsthand. So I spent many. I wasn't an animator. I was a TD, a technical director, but I shared an office with an animator, and Phil was in there all the time, dancing around with our, my office mate, pretending to be, a raptor or a Rex or whoever, a Gallimimus, just, becoming the characters and then teaching him how to animate basically to his standards. And, we all knew how to animate, but there's, as we all know, there's a craft to it or technique. So that worked out really well. And then just sort of the extreme foreground work was done by Stan Winston, who is now sadly deceased, and he had a animatronic shop down in Los Angeles, and they built these full scale, like he built a full scale T-Rex, which was used in just a few shots, mostly where it didn't need to move, like it was static, or
Mm-hmm.
your extreme close up of a foot coming down into the frame. The classic, I think it's a trailer shot, hitting the puddle of water.
Yep.
That's all animatronic. Sorry, Stan Winston work. Who, by the way, you mentioned John Rosengrant last time, but that John was there with that, doing, front and
Yep.
center on set. And so yeah, so we had Stan doing that on set, and then we were, waiting in post basically to add the dinosaurs running and moving around and interacting with people. So, um, for us, technically, it was, um, a huge, demand for us. We didn't know how to do skin at that point. We had the benefit of the Pixar guys leaving behind their version of RenderMan, and we had a deal with them where we could get their latest version, and we could, they were literally in the building next door, so we could walk over and ask them questions. And so we built skin shaders, and we beefed up our computer systems, more disk space. But it was a new frontier for us. We weren't sure we were going to do it, but we felt confident coming out of T2 that we could give it a serious go. Um, so that's where it launched. And I mean, to think about moving from a single character to multiple characters was also, just a workflow thing that we had to figure out. We used, initially we got into, thanks to Phil's, style of animation, got into, very specific blocking passes and just working out choreographies in a very rudimentary form before we actually, started to really animate, keyframe animate. And that helped a lot, just characters moving through along a path at a specific timing, entering and exiting and so forth. Um, that was invaluable to us to kind of work that out and have that interface with Stephen, get his response, adjust, and then we could get into animation, actually, localized animation of the characters. So that was great. There were a lot of innovations, technical innovations along the way. Our tracking tools were pretty rudimentary up that point. We had some great in-house developers who built improved upon our tracking tools, um, and and then same with our compositing tools. We needed a sort of a more robust interface to compositing, as I think I had mentioned. A lot of it up to that point was largely command line driven. Um, Make it brighter. You'd literally type it out in the command that you needed to do, and we needed a way of basically including sliders and dials. So they developed us, some UI to that, which helped a lot in terms of speeding up the process and so forth. And then, we're also at the point where we could actually composite and film out our own shots. So the tide had shifted in that at that point, where there wasn't a question of like, should we should we film out just dinosaur elements and have them optically composited. But now there was a wholesale shift into compositing our own shots, which gave us a lot of quick feedback response and be able to iterate more efficiently rather than going out to film, waiting for that to be filmed, to be optically printed, and then waiting for the negative to come back, strike a print from that, and then view it. The turnaround on that was days as opposed to an hour or two for us when we were just compositing it digitally. So it was quite a uptick in our efficiencies.
Yeah. It's interesting you talked about command line, which I think is happening now again with the AI, where you're
Yeah,
doing prompting, right? And like
yeah,
eventually we'll probably go into that same place where, the sliding tools and everything. And and I'll tell you, man, like and I said this to John, I've said this to almost everybody who's worked on Jurassic Park I've spoken to. Jurassic Park changed a lot of people's lives. Obviously the industry and everything. That movie is the sole reason I am a film director today. And 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 I would always say Spielberg because of Spielberg, but talking to people now in the podcast, it makes you realize that. And I've read that Making of Jurassic Park book. I've seen like behind the scenes stuff like so many times. It is such a collaborative effort that those dinosaurs, if they had not looked real, who knows where the industry would have gone?
yeah,
Who knows
yeah,
if me and people like me didn't want to pursue in that industry. So it's a
yeah.
very amazing thing that you guys all did. And obviously, time and effort and rendering back then was like, even rendering like 15, 20 years ago was a nightmare. I can't even imagine like, 30, 40 years ago.
Oh
So
yeah.
kudos to you guys. It's just been, yeah, it's probably the most, in my view, the best visual effects in any Jurassic Park film by far.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, maybe because it was so fresh and unexpected at the time.
Yeah.
I go back and I look at it and go, well, it's not quite holding up.
No, but even if you
But
look at like scenes like where the T-Rex chases the Jeep, I
yeah,
get it, like there's trees and it's nighttime. A lot of T-Rex shots were in the dark, except the one where he when the what are those dinosaurs called?
Gallimimus.
Gallimimus, like the
Yeah,
over the tree. Like
yeah.
that, even to like it just looks amazingly real. I mean, and the whole sequence in the end when the T-Rex
In
grabs
the
the
rotunda.
pterodactyl.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's just yeah.
yeah.
I like I say. I mean, I think one film that comes close to it is probably Joe Johnson Jurassic Park 3,
Mm,
in terms of
yeah,
visual effects, like in the seamlessly blending in. But yeah,
yeah.
amazing, amazing stuff.
I think a large you're touching on something that I think is intangible in our industry and it's certainly not recognized, and that is um, Steven's innate ability to stage action. He just has an instinct to it. I've witnessed it many times. Just standing behind him, watching him set up a shot, and you just go, "Wow, that's gonna be cool." You can already see what he's thinking, and just that is it's so underappreciated in filmmaking. Typically it's some gratuitous wide, you know, visual for the sake of visual, and essentially the visuals start driving the narrative as opposed to the story. And that Stephen's really good at sticking to story. Does that visual serve the story? He's always asking the question. And then how do I stage that so that it's, there's a high level of interest in understanding and watching it. So he's
Do
very, very good at that. Um, but you touched one moment on the technical limitations. We also, just a quick story.
Sure.
We we had the render times were obscene. I recall sometimes 3, 4 hours a frame. So and back in those days, we had very limited processors and we had very limited disk space. So saving stuff. We'd render a take, but before we rendered a take, we'd have to move the previous take offline to some other place, so that we could make room. We just didn't have enough space to store it. And the sad thing is, like, the typical render in a shot was, you know, from recollection, it was maybe like 300 megabytes. It wasn't that big, right? In grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But we didn't have enough space to accommodate it. So um, uh, I remember there was one artist who he literally he spent 2 days rendering a shot, and it didn't work. So something happened where he ended up basically deleting the wrong
Oh,
render,
okay. Right.
and so it was like, oh, we were back to, okay, another 2.5 days of rendering this shot. But it was it taught you, to think all the way through the problem. And there, like I keep saying there's over and over, there's a lot of collaboration on this at that time when we were, everybody was, we were young and green and, highly receptive to input. So it was great.
Awesome. I do have two questions, and you can answer in whichever order you like. One is, you're talking about how Stephen, you witnessed him working um without the actual physical dinosaurs being there, and he's just trying to frame the shot. If you can think of a example, I know it's been a long time ago. If you can, great. If not, no worries. And the second question is, when you're working on a film like Jurassic Park, right? This is like pre-internet, but still there could be leakage and all that stuff, like to media and all that. Ho- Do you talk about it to anybody when you go home to your friends that, hey, I'm working on this dinosaur film with Steven Spielberg, or you want to
No,
talk? Do you want to talk about it? But you obviously you have an NDA, right?
yeah, yeah, we're not really allowed to, and I think at large the industry is pretty respectful of that. Um, Even when we're working on a project, it always is under some code name. So
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
don't, so there's no indication in out there in the ether. Um,
But you have
but
the urge ever to do that?
oh, of course. I mean, there are shows where you think, "Wow, I just can't wait for people to see this," and it's
Yeah,
so exciting, and you want to talk about it, but you can't. You have to,
yeah,
you really have to bite your tongue. And um, but yeah, and I would say that it's the same with in terms of Steven's abilities. I have many experiences there, and I there actually the last time I worked with him directly was like on AI, so I can't really talk about that. But
yeah. I know nobody wants to
um,
talk about that. I've had so many people tell me they can't talk about AI, so I get
yeah,
it.
yeah, it's sort of you're just not supposed to. So,
Yeah,
but you just have to take my word for it. I mean, it's just his ability to stage action smartly, and he is thinking 3 steps ahead of you.
yeah.
And um, it's great. That's what you want from a director, and he's obviously the master at that.
Yeah, no, I look, I completely agree. I mean, for me, the way he blocks is just amazing. And one particular shot, for some reason, it just stays in my memory. It's nothing significant, but there is a scene in Minority Report,
Mm.
where Tom Cruise is about to escape and Colin Firth kind of confronts him. And it's like when they get into the elevator An
Yeah.
elevator is a small space,
Yeah.
right? And the way the action is taking place, they're moving around, and the camera is in so much is synchronized with them that
Yeah.
you don't feel that there's a camera. And that's to me is Spielberg at its best. And he does that
Yeah.
over and over again in every freaking film.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually touched on that because it's an important work. It's important style of filmmaking that I think is worth reiterating. And I learned this also from Bob Zemeckis and actually Jim Cameron. The three are very good at that, at grounding the cameras. They
Yeah.
really they put, if you watch their work, it's always in some physically plausible space. Especially in the world of computer graphics now, where you can have these magic cameras flying through the air and at ridiculous speeds and so forth. Um, they'll never do that. They might pop wide for a geography shot just to remind the audience where things are. But for the most part, y you're there as a, first person, observer. You're present in the experience with them, and that's, because they're situating the camera in some physically plausible space. Um, you know, I think that's part of why, as computer graphics as of late has gotten a bad rap, and deservedly so, and because a lot of directors don't understand this, and they figure, well, I can do anything with the camera, and they do. So they pop into worlds that you just couldn't shoot realistically, and we sort of subconsciously understand that that's not how do I they can't you can't compute those kind of that kind of action or that kind of camera
Hmm.
motion, and so the shot falls apart as a result. So I think that's something that he in particular is very good at, but certainly I've seen that work, that sort of style with Bob Zemeckis and Jim
Yeah.
Cameron's. Yeah.
Yeah. I would add one more name to that, Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to avoid watching his films because I'm not like a into violence and everything. But then I got into his film in 2010, very, very late, right? But it was just my apologies. It was the way he does it too. It's just again, you're just completely pulled in
Yeah.
and you don't know that there's a camera. And I completely agree, like this whole thing about, steady cams and gimbals and drones, and it becomes an overkill. It
Yeah.
totally becomes, and a prime example of that. Have you seen Ambulance, Michael Bay film?
No.
Great film, loved it.
Mm.
But the opening 5 minutes was like at that time the new drone had come out, like
Yeah.
the one with the
Yeah.
go. It was just like ridiculous amount of drone shots for no. I'm
Yeah.
like, what is he doing? And this is not you.
Yeah.
And it's pulled me out of the film completely.
Yeah. It's the technology driving the story again, and
Yeah,
it's unfortunate. Yeah. Michael, in fairness to him, he has that
he,
style. I
he
mean,
does. He does.
he's the master of the 18 frame shot, which is, but he kind of overwhelms you with so I would call it a collage of imagery, and that's people respond to that. Some people like that, or a lot
No,
of people.
I
Yeah.
I love Michael Bay
Yeah.
films. I
Yeah.
love The Rock. I even enjoyed Ambulance. But it's just that first few minutes of that film, there
Yeah.
were just some unnecessary. I was talking to John Schwartzman, who's worked with
Mm,
him on Armageddon. He's a DP.
mm,
And
mm.
he said the exact same thing to me. Like, what happened with the ambulance opening? Because it was just insane amount of drone shots, but that's fine. I mean, but at the end of the day, it's just story, right? It's like the heart of everything is freaking story. If you provide a good story, nobody remembers what tools you used, what technology you used. The end.
Right. I would say, just to adjust a little bit on what you said, it, the story has to have heart, and that
Yeah,
is key, as opposed to
100%.
yeah. I mean, it has to have heart, and in order to do that, you have to have likable characters and a resonating message, I think.
And not and also not likable characters because sometimes people
Yeah.
connect to those too because we have those vulnerabilities ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So,
True. Very true. Yeah.
yeah. So when Jurassic Park is done and finished and June 11th, 1993, right? That's the date. I know
Uh,
this
I'm getting old.
very vividly. No, I know this very vividly because I was in grade 10 or 11, I think 11, and I used to take subway home, which is like a good 40-minute ride. And you know how those ads on the opposite
Yeah.
side of the track, and it had the
Yeah.
Jurassic Park logo, and it said June 11, 1993. And I had no freaking idea what it was. I thought it was some museum or something. So that's why that date sticks in my head because I used to see it every freaking day for like months and months. So yeah, film comes out and it's received, it breaks all the records. I remember it made 48 million or 49 million on the opening weekend, which at that time was like ridiculously high.
Yeah.
And were you expecting that that audience receiving it, the industry receiving it to that level? Because
Yeah,
because
to be
because
honest with
I
you, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We it was another one where I mean again because it was so new and fresh, and I think we had done a respectable job with, we had done an exceptional job with the animation, and I think the lighting and the rendering compositing was pretty good. I look back at it and I go, oh, but it's it was at that time it was very good, and so I felt like there were no scenes that took us out of the movie when you watched it, and so we were felt really confident. We were very happy with how it played, and of course not really surprised that it was well received. It's a fun movie.
Yeah. And it came out, I think it was probably the longest running movie in a movie theater for a while because it came out October 4th or 5th and the next year, 16 months later. I mean, that's unheard of. I remember because I got the VHS on the day it came out, right? So but yeah, it's like and now I mean it's like 2, 3 week period, sometimes a month, but 16 months is a long time because it kept running. It kept running in the movie theaters even during the Oscar time the following year.
Yeah, I remember actually having a similar experience with Indiana Jones, when it first came out. It was sort of the
The,
same thing. You couldn't see it enough times, and that had that
the,
same another Spielberg classic, but it
you're
was
talking about the Raiders, right? The first one.
Raiders of the Lost Ark, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
the original, yeah, which is just you. I remember a similar age. I was a teenager. I remember talking to my brother, like, let's go watch it again. And so we lived in Los Angeles. We'd drive over to Westwood, get a burger, and then watch Indiana Jones for the eighth time or something like that.
yeah. Yeah, no, I honestly, man, like those movies and even 60s, 70s. I mean, I'm not that old, but I love 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s. And I don't know, I think the superhero world, personally for me, I don't watch superhero films besides the Christopher Nolan ones. I think it has really taken the industry in a completely different direction. Those same films that
Yeah,
used to be like heart-warming stories of the 90s and the 80s, you don't see them anymore. Or they make them, but nobody hears about them.
yeah, yeah. It's very true. I've managed to stay away from superhero movies for that reason.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like to do the old classics, and occasionally I'll certainly enjoy watching one. I enjoyed watching the latest um uh what's it called? The Wolverine, and I'm blanking
oh,
on it.
the Deadpool one.
Deadpool and Wolverine, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I, I thought that was fun. It's not as far as, you know, these superhero movies go. I think the less serious they take themselves, I think the better.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen it. The only superhero movies I've seen is obviously the Batman trilogy, the first and second Spider-Man by Sam Raimi,
Yeah.
and the first X-Men movie because it was shot in Toronto at Casa Loma, and I remember trying to sneak in on the set, which I never was able to do. But yeah, those are the only ones. Awesome. Well, Jurassic Park. Yeah, there's another one coming out now and in the summer, and I think the
Yep.
trailer is supposed to launch at Super Bowl, Jurassic World Rebirth. I am I love Gareth Edwards' work. I really enjoy him I think he has a
Good
heart in his
filmmaker.
stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it. Are you excited about it?
It's hard for me to say. I feel the same thing. I think Gareth does really good work.
Yeah.
And he always puts a nice spin on things that I think are, clever and unexpected. But I kind of feel like they've beaten that franchise
I
to
do
death
think so
now,
too.
and
Yeah.
so I'm having trouble with, just I understand there's still an appeal. People want to see dinosaurs. That you can never get enough of dinosaurs, and so especially younger kids they just love it, or reach
Yeah.
that age, the teens.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. If Gareth wasn't doing it, I probably would have no interest because I like Jurassic World. I didn't finish. Oh, I did finish it, but I didn't really finish it. The second one, third one, I thought was eh. But I'm just hoping that Gareth does something different, that it kind of brings you back. I mean, they're trying to market it that way. They're trying to say that it's gonna feel like the 1993 version, but we'll see.
Mm, mm.
Awesome, awesome, well, awesome. That's great, man. Thank you.